My name is Madison Cooper, and 6 months ago, I watched my manager delete 2 years of my work in front of 30 colleagues while declaring it was useless garbage that served no purpose. He stood behind my computer, announced to the entire department that my optimization project was a complete failure, and then pressed delete, while everyone watched in absolute silence. What he actually deleted was the database that had saved our company $15 million in the past year. And when my phone rang 4 minutes later with an offer of $1.2 million annually to be an executive director, I realized he had just handed me the key to the most perfect revenge I could have ever dreamed of. Before I tell you exactly how watching his panic became the sweetest moment of my professional career, could you take a second to hit like on this video and subscribe? Because what I'm about to share will show you how a moment of public humiliation can become the most lucrative opportunity of your life, but only if you know how to handle it strategically. Let me take you to the beginning of this story, because the best revenge always starts long before the humiliation occurs. 2.5 years ago, I joined Global Systems Meridian as a senior process analyst. It was a multinational based in Chicago that specialized in technology solutions for the financial sector. My official job sounded technical and boring: analyze workflows, identify inefficiencies, propose system improvements. What I didn't expect was that I was entering a company where inflated egos mattered more than actual results. My manager, Robert Martinez, was the type of person who confused aggression with leadership. He had been at the company for 8 years, long enough to develop a network of political allies, but not long enough to actually understand the systems he supposedly directed. He was one of those people who spoke in corporate jargon constantly: human resource optimization, synergy maximization, vertical strategic alignment. But when you asked him specific questions about how to implement any of those things, his answers became vague and defensive. From my first week, I noticed something strange about Meridian's processes. They had 3 different departments handling nearly identical tasks: data verification, compliance auditing, and quality control. Each department had its own software, its own protocols, and its own managers who fiercely defended their territory. It was like watching 3 people clean the same room with different vacuum cleaners while fighting over who had the right to vacuum which corner. The redundancy was absurd. The data verification department reviewed financial transactions to detect errors. Then, the compliance auditing department reviewed the same transactions to ensure they met regulations. Finally, the quality control department reviewed the transactions a 3rd time to confirm that the other 2 departments had done their job correctly. It was like having 3 editors read the same paragraph and each suggest different corrections to the same words. But Robert didn't see this as a problem. He saw it as robust oversight and multi-layered quality controls. When I suggested in my 2nd week that we could integrate the 3 processes into a single workflow, he looked at me like I had proposed tearing down the offices with an excavator. "Madison," he said with that condescending smile I would come to hate, "these processes exist for important reasons. You can't simply change systems that have worked for years without understanding the underlying complexity." But I did understand the complexity. I spent the next 6 months documenting every step of every process, timing every task, interviewing every employee involved. I discovered that a typical transaction took 127 minutes to complete when it went through all 3 departments. The same transaction could be processed in 34 minutes with an integrated system. Not only was it faster, but it was also more accurate because it eliminated communication errors between departments. The resistance I encountered was immediate and visceral. The managers of each department were convinced that integration would eliminate their positions. Employees were sure they would have to learn complicated new systems. Robert was convinced that I was trying to make him look bad by suggesting that the processes under his supervision were inefficient. But the data didn't lie. We were wasting massive resources on redundancy that added no real value. So I began working on what I called internally Project Streamline. It was my proposal to integrate the 3 departments into a single optimized workflow. I worked on this during my free time, weekends, and vacations. I analyzed every data point, mapped every process, identified every bottleneck. I calculated exactly how much time we could save, how much money we could economize, and how much more precise our results could be. The final project consisted of 247 pages of detailed analysis, 89 process flowcharts, 156 comparative data tables, and a step-by-step implementation that could be completed in 6 months with minimal service interruption. I showed how integration would save $15.3 million annually in operational costs, while improving processing accuracy by 43%. These weren't vague estimates or optimistic projections. They were specific calculations based on real performance data. But the most beautiful part of Project Streamline was that it didn't eliminate jobs. Instead of firing people, it redistributed talent toward more valuable tasks. Data verification analysts would become pattern detection specialists. Compliance auditors would focus on preventive policy development. Quality controllers would become process trainers for other departments. It was a win-win situation. The company saved money, employees got more interesting roles, and clients received faster and more accurate service. I presented Project Streamline to Robert in a private meeting on a Tuesday morning in January. I expected resistance, but I was prepared with answers to every possible objection. I had anticipated questions about implementation costs, training schedules, service interruption risks. I had solutions for every potential problem and data supporting every recommendation. His reaction was strange. He didn't ask technical questions. He didn't challenge my calculations. He didn't request clarifications about implementation. Instead, he flipped through the pages with an expression that seemed more annoyed than interested. After 15 minutes of silence, he closed the folder and looked directly at me. "Madison," he said, "I think you're misunderstanding your role here. Your job is to analyze existing processes, not redesign the entire departmental structure." I tried to explain that process optimization necessarily required examining how departments interacted with each other, that you couldn't improve efficiency without considering the complete workflow. But he interrupted me with a raised hand. "This type of project requires approval from multiple management levels," he said. "You can't simply propose massive structural changes without consulting with appropriate stakeholders." He was right about the approval process, but his tone suggested the problem wasn't procedural. The problem was that I had created something that made his management look inadequate. If Project Streamline was implemented and worked, it would become obvious that these efficiency problems had existed under his supervision for years without being addressed. My solution wasn't just a technical improvement, it was an involuntary exposure of his managerial incompetence. "Let's put this aside for now," he said, pushing the folder across his desk toward me. "I want you to focus on your primary responsibilities. We have annual performance reviews coming up, and I need you to finish your routine analyses before pursuing special projects." I left that meeting feeling frustrated, but not defeated. I had expected initial resistance. Important changes always face skepticism, especially when they challenge established power structures. I decided I needed to be more strategic about how I presented the project. Maybe Robert needed to see evidence of support from other departments before feeling comfortable backing the idea. I spent the following weeks having informal conversations with colleagues from the 3 affected departments. I wanted to understand their perspectives, address their concerns, and potentially gain their support for integration. What I discovered was surprising. Most employees were already frustrated with the redundancy and inefficiency. They knew they were doing duplicate work. They knew transactions took too long. They knew that communication errors between departments caused regular problems. Maria Santos, a senior analyst from the data verification department, told me, "Madison, I've been doing the same work as the auditing department for 4 years. Every day we process the same transactions and reach the same conclusions. It's like 3 people painting the same wall with different brushes. Everyone knows it's inefficient, but nobody wants to be the first to say it." Carlos Mendoza, supervisor of the quality control department, was even more direct. "Your ideas about integration make complete sense. We could do our job better and faster if we work together instead of in separate silos. But Robert is convinced that any change is a threat to his authority. He's blocked every improvement proposal we've suggested in the past 3 years. After a month of conversations, I had informal support from 23 employees across the 3 departments. They weren't just willing to participate in Project Streamline, but they were excited about the possibility of doing more meaningful work. Several even contributed additional optimization ideas I hadn't initially considered. Armed with this support, I scheduled another meeting with Robert to present an updated version of the project that included input from affected employees. I thought that seeing enthusiasm from his own team might change his perspective on the viability of integration. This second meeting was even more frustrating than the first. Robert listened to my presentation with an expression that alternated between boredom and irritation. When I finished, he leaned back in his chair and sighed audibly. "Madison," he said, "I think there's a fundamental disconnect between what you think your job is and what your job actually is. Your role is to analyze existing processes and report performance metrics. It's not to redesign organizational structure or lead change initiatives." I tried to explain that process analysis necessarily identified improvement opportunities, that reporting problems without proposing solutions was only partially useful. But he interrupted me again. "Structural changes require input from external consultants, extensive feasibility studies, and approval from corporate headquarters. You can't simply decide you know how to restructure entire departments based on a few months of observation." The implication was clear. I didn't have the experience, authority, or right to propose significant changes. My job was to document problems, not solve them. It was to collect data, not interpret it. It was to report inefficiencies, not eliminate them. "I want you to shelve this project," he continued, "and get back to focusing on your primary responsibilities. We have important deadlines coming up, and I need you to use your time more productively." I left that second meeting feeling something different, not just frustrated, but genuinely confused about why someone would actively reject a proposal that could save millions of dollars and significantly improve operational efficiency. I began to wonder if there was something about the company's political dynamics that I wasn't understanding. That's when I decided to do something that would change the entire course of this story. Secretly document the implementation of Project Streamline on my own. Not as an official proposal, but as a proof of concept that could be used to convince senior management that integration was not only possible, but essential for the company's long-term competitiveness. Over the next 8 months, I worked on what I called Streamline 2.0. It was a fully developed version of the original project that included software prototypes, detailed training schedules, comprehensive risk analysis, and financial projections covering a 5-year period. I worked on this during my nights, weekends, and lunch breaks. Nobody at the company knew I was developing it. Not even the colleagues who had expressed support for integration knew I was creating a complete implementation plan. Streamline 2.0 was more than a proposal. It was a complete blueprint for organizational transformation. It included technical specifications for integrated software, training protocols for transitioning employees, performance metrics to measure implementation success, and communication strategies to manage change resistance. It had 340 pages of technical documentation, 67 user interface mockups, 123 process flow diagrams, and a functional software demonstration that showed exactly what the integrated system would look like. But the most powerful part of Streamline 2.0 was that it was no longer theoretical. I had created a beta version of the integrated system and tested it with real historical data. The results were even better than I had initially projected. Processing time was reduced by 67%, accuracy increased by 52%, and operational costs decreased by 73%. These weren't estimates or projections. They were measured results from a system that actually worked. My plan was to wait until the annual strategic planning meeting to present Streamline 2.0 to senior management, completely bypassing Robert. I had concluded that he would never support integration because it threatened his control over departmental processes. But if I could demonstrate to C-level executives that optimization could save more than $15 million annually, they might order implementation regardless of Robert's objections. but Robert discovered what I was doing before I had the opportunity to present the project to senior management. And his reaction was more extreme than I could have ever anticipated. On a Friday morning in October, I arrived at the office to find an email from Robert calling an urgent meeting of the entire department. The subject line read, "Critical Review of Processes and Project Protocols." I knew immediately it referred to Streamline 2.0, but I didn't know how he had discovered I was working on it. The meeting was scheduled for 10 a.m. in the main conference room. When I arrived, all 30 members of our department were already seated around the long table, with expressions ranging from curiosity to anxiety. Robert was standing at the front of the room with my laptop open, connected to the main projector. On the screen was the main file of Streamline 2.0. "Good morning, everyone," he began, with a voice that tried to sound professional but had an edge I had never heard before. "I called this meeting to discuss a situation that requires immediate attention. It appears that one of our team members has been working on an unauthorized project that violates multiple company protocols." My stomach sank. He hadn't just discovered Streamline 2.0, but he was going to use it to publicly humiliate me in front of the entire department. I looked around the table and saw my colleagues exchanging confused glances. Clearly, nobody else knew what he was talking about. "Madison," he said, addressing me directly, "could you explain to everyone what this is?" He clicked on the file and the screen showed the title page of Streamline 2.0, Departmental Process Integration, a proposal for organizational optimization. I felt every eye in the room focus on me. My face got hot and my heart started beating faster. "It's a personal research project," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "A proposal to improve operational efficiency based on my analysis of our current processes." "A personal research project?" he repeated, with a smile that had nothing friendly about it. "You mean a project you developed using company resources, during work hours, without management authorization, and in direct violation of specific instructions I gave you about not pursuing structural change initiatives." Every word felt like a blow. He was completely misrepresenting the circumstances under which I had developed the project, but doing it in front of 30 colleagues made me feel like I was being tried for a crime I hadn't committed. "I worked on this during my personal time," I responded, "and based the research on process analysis that's within my job description. I didn't violate any protocols by analyzing operational efficiency." "Your personal time?" he said, clicking through the project files. "Then why is it stored on company servers? Why does it include proprietary information about our internal processes? Why does it contain software mock-ups that use our corporate branding?" He was right about the technical details, but he was using those details to make my research seem like some kind of malicious activity. "I used company resources for research because the project is designed to benefit the company," I explained. "All the information I included is based on processes I analyze as part of my regular job." "To benefit the company?" His voice got higher. "Or to make yourself look like you're smarter than the managers who have been running these processes for years? To suggest that you know better than experienced executives how our organization should be structured?" Now he was attacking not just my project, but my motivations for creating it. In front of the entire department, he was painting my work as personal arrogance rather than professional contribution. I looked around the table and saw that some of my colleagues seemed uncomfortable, but nobody said anything in my defense. "My intention was to identify improvement opportunities," I said, feeling my voice getting smaller. "That's what process analysis is supposed to do. Find ways to do things better." "Do things better?" Robert clicked on a page showing my cost savings calculations. "Are you saying our current processes are inadequate? That the departments I supervise are functioning poorly? That the systems we've developed over years need to be completely eliminated?" Every question was designed to make any answer sound like a personal attack on him. If I said yes, I was admitting I believed he was an incompetent manager. If I said no, I was admitting my project was unnecessary. There was no way to respond without validating his narrative that I was being insubordinate. "I'm saying there's always room for improvement," I replied. "And my research identified some specific opportunities that could benefit the company." "Specific opportunities?" Now he was clicking through the most technical pages of the project. "Like eliminating entire departments?" Like redistributing employees without consulting their current managers? Like implementing software that would make existing systems obsolete? He was presenting every aspect of the project in the most threatening way possible. Departmental integration became eliminating entire departments. Role optimization became redistributing employees without consulting. Software updates became making existing systems obsolete. The project doesn't eliminate any jobs, I said, trying to correct his misrepresentations. It proposes ways to better use existing talent while improving operational efficiency. Better use existing talent? Robert looked directly at me with an expression that seemed genuinely angry. Are you saying you know the strengths and weaknesses of our employees better than the managers who have been working with them for years? The trap was perfect. No matter how I answered, it would confirm his narrative that I was being arrogant and insubordinate. If I defended my research, it would seem like I was attacking his managerial competence. If I backed down, it would seem like I admitted the project was useless. I based my recommendations on data analysis, I said, not personal judgments about individual employees. Data analysis? He clicked on a page showing process flow diagrams. You mean you reduced the contributions of experienced employees to data points? That you treated complex processes that developed over years as if they were simple mathematical problems? Now he was attacking not just my project, but my entire approach to process analysis. He was suggesting that using data and metrics was somehow dehumanizing or simplistic. But what he did next was much worse than any criticism of my methodology. He stood directly in front of my laptop, with his fingers over the keyboard, and looked at me with a smile that had nothing professional about it. Madison, he said, this project represents exactly the kind of work we don't want in this department. It's speculative, unauthorized, divisive, and completely useless for our real objectives. His hand moved toward the keys. This serves no purpose, he announced to the entire room. It's garbage that distracts from real and productive work. And then he pressed delete. I watched 8 months of work disappear from the screen. 340 pages of analysis, 67 mock-ups, 123 flowcharts, a functional software system that had demonstrated $15 million in cost savings, all erased in 1 second of personal revenge. The silence in the conference room was absolute. Some of my colleagues were looking at their hands, clearly uncomfortable with what they were witnessing. Others were staring at me with expressions that seemed like a mix of sympathy and relief that it wasn't happening to them. Robert stepped away from the laptop with an expression of satisfaction. From now on, he said, all projects must be pre-approved by management before any development. I don't want to see any more speculative work that isn't specifically assigned. Is that clear? A murmur of yes and understood filled the room. Nobody looked at me. Nobody asked if I was okay. Nobody questioned whether deleting 8 months of work was an appropriate response to what I had presented as a personal research project. But then something extraordinary happened. My phone started vibrating. The caller ID showed a number I didn't recognize with an international area code. Normally, I would have let it go to voicemail, but something about the moment made me feel I should answer. Excuse me, I said, standing up from the table. I need to take this call. Robert looked at me with irritation. We're in the middle of an important meeting. It can wait. But I was already walking toward the exit. It's urgent, I said, though I had no idea who could be calling. I left the conference room and answered the phone in the hallway, with my hands still shaking from watching my work get deleted in front of everyone. Hello? I said, trying to keep my voice professional despite having just experienced the most public humiliation of my career. Madison Cooper? Said a voice with a slight British accent. This is James Morrison, Director of Operations at Pinnacle Solutions International. I hope you have a moment to talk. Pinnacle Solutions International. Even in my state of shock, I recognized the name. It was one of the world's most prestigious management consulting firms, a company that worked with Fortune 500 companies to optimize their global operations. Why would they be calling me? Yes, I said. I have a moment. How can I help you? Actually, he replied, it's what we can do for you. We've been observing your work at Global Systems Meridian, and we're very impressed with your approach to process analysis and organizational optimization." My heart started beating faster. "How do you know about my work?" "We have contacts in multiple companies in the financial sector," he explained. "Your reputation for identifying inefficiencies and proposing innovative solutions has come to our attention. Specifically, we've heard about a process integration project you developed that could save millions in operational costs. Streamline 2.0. Somehow, someone had talked about my project with people outside the company. But how? And who? I understand you may be in a position where your talent isn't being fully utilized," James continued. "Pinnacle Solutions is looking for a director of process optimization to lead our organizational transformation initiatives in Latin America. It's a position that would allow you to implement exactly the kind of systemic changes you've been proposing." The irony was so perfect I almost laughed. Here I was, standing in the hallway after my boss had publicly deleted my work, calling it useless garbage, and one of the world's most prestigious consulting firms was offering me to lead exactly the kind of projects Robert had declared impossible. "Can you tell me more about the position?" I asked, walking further from the conference room to make sure nobody could hear. "Of course. You would be supervising a team of 15 senior consultants, working directly with CEOs and boards of directors to implement operational transformations in multinational companies. The base salary is $1.2 million annually, plus performance bonuses that typically add another $400,000 to $600,000. It also includes a complete relocation package, premium international health insurance, and 6 weeks of annual vacation. $1.2 million. My current salary at Meridian was $78,000 annually. This offer was more than 15 times what I was earning to do work that Robert considered too ambitious for my level. "When would you need an answer?" I asked, trying to keep my voice professional despite my mind racing with possibilities. "We understand this type of decision requires careful consideration," James said. "But to be completely honest, this opportunity is time-sensitive. We have several candidates under consideration, and we would need to confirm your interest in the next 48 hours to move you to the next round of the selection process." 48 hours. 2 days to decide if I wanted to leave a company where my work was considered useless garbage for an opportunity that would pay $1.2 million to do exactly what I had been trying to do for free. "I'm very interested," I said. "What would be the next steps?" "Excellent. I'll send you an email with complete details of the position and documents for the application process. If you can complete the initial application by tomorrow, we could schedule an interview with the selection panel for next Tuesday." After hanging up, I stood in the hallway for a moment, trying to process what had just happened. In the span of 4 minutes, I had gone from experiencing the most public humiliation of my career to receiving the most lucrative job offer of my life. When I returned to the conference room, Robert was concluding his monologue about project protocols and the importance of staying within assigned responsibility boundaries. The meeting ended a few minutes later, with my colleagues filing out in uncomfortable silence, but I felt completely different. The humiliation had been replaced by a sense of anticipation I could barely contain. Robert thought he had destroyed my work and put an end to my unauthorized ambitions. In reality, he had just handed me the perfect motivation to accelerate my exit to something infinitely better. The next 2 days were the most intense of my professional life. After that call with James Morrison, I knew I had a unique opportunity not just to escape from Meridian, but to do it in a way that would turn my public humiliation into the most elegant revenge possible. The first step was completing the application for Pinnacle Solutions, but I needed to do it without anyone at Meridian knowing what was happening. I worked from home that night, recreating parts of Project Streamline from my personal backup files. I had been smart enough to save copies of all my work to my personal Google Drive, so even though Robert had deleted the official version, I still had access to everything. But while working on the application, I realized I had an opportunity to do something much more powerful than simply getting a new job. I had the opportunity to demonstrate exactly how valuable the work was that Robert had dismissed, and do it in a way that would be impossible to ignore. The Pinnacle Solutions application required specific examples of optimization projects I had led. with quantifiable success metrics. I decided to present Project Streamline not as a rejected proposal, but as a complete case study of how I had identified and solved massive inefficiencies in a multinational corporation. I included all the data, all the calculations, all the software mock-ups, but presented them as if it had been an independent consulting project I had completed for Meridian. Technically, I wasn't lying. I had done all that work. I had identified the problems, developed the solutions, and created a functional system that demonstrated $15 million in savings. The fact that Robert had rejected implementing it didn't change the value of the analysis or the validity of the solutions. The resulting application was impressive even by my own standards. 67 pages of detailed analysis, case studies of 3 different optimization projects, testimonials from colleagues who had seen my work, and a cover letter explaining my philosophy about organizational transformation. It was the kind of application that made other candidates look amateur in comparison. I submitted the application at 11:47 p.m. on Friday, exactly 37 hours after Robert had deleted my work. As I pressed submit, I felt a mix of nervousness and anticipation I hadn't experienced since my college days. I knew I had created something special, something that could completely change the trajectory of my career. Monday morning, I tried to act normal at the office. Robert had assigned me some routine data analysis tasks, clearly designed to keep me busy with work, appropriate for my level. But every time he looked at me, I could see satisfaction in his eyes. He thought he had won, that he had put an end to my unauthorized ambitions and put me in my place. At 2:30 p.m., I received an email from James Morrison. The subject line read, "Pinnacle Solutions, Next Step." My heart started beating faster as I opened the message. "Madison, your application is extraordinary. The selection panel is unanimously impressed with the depth of your analysis and the innovation of your solutions. We want to move you immediately to the final interview process. Could you be available for a video call tomorrow at 10 a.m. Central Time? This would be an interview with our CEO, Sarah Chen, and 2 board members. An interview with the CEO. That meant I was being seriously considered for the position, but it also meant I would have to miss work for the interview, which could generate questions I wasn't ready to answer. I replied confirming my availability and asking about technical details for the video call. Then I began planning how to handle the absence from work. I decided I would say I had a medical appointment that couldn't be rescheduled. That night, I prepared for the most important interview of my life. I researched everything I could about Pinnacle Solutions, their major clients, their recent projects, and their corporate philosophy. I practiced answering questions about my experience, my analysis methods, and my vision for organizational transformation. But most importantly, I prepared a 10-minute presentation about Project Streamline that could demonstrate exactly the kind of work I could do for their clients. Tuesday morning, I called Robert to tell him I had a medical emergency and would be late. His response was typically insensitive. "I hope it's nothing that will affect your productivity for the rest of the week." He didn't even ask if I was okay. The interview began exactly at 10 a.m. Sarah Chen, Pinnacle Solutions CEO, was an Asian American woman in her mid-40s with a presence that radiated competence and confidence. The 2 board members were Alexander Kowalski, a senior consultant with 20 years of experience in organizational transformation, and Priya Patel, a former CFO who now specialized in financial process optimization. "Madison," Sarah began, "your application is one of the most impressive we've seen in years. The work you presented on departmental process integration shows exactly the kind of systemic thinking we look for in our senior consultants. Could you tell us more about how you developed those solutions?" For the next 45 minutes, I presented Project Streamline with more detail and passion than I had ever done. I explained how I had identified the redundancies, how I had calculated cost savings, how I had designed the integrated system, and how I had created an implementation plan that minimized disruption while maximizing efficiency. But the most powerful part of the presentation was when I showed the functional prototype of the integrated software. I had created a demonstration that processed real data and showed exactly what the optimized workflows would look like. It wasn't just a theoretical proposal. It was a system that actually worked. The questions that followed were challenging but respectful. Alexander wanted to know about my experience managing change resistance. Priya was interested in the technical details of the financial analysis. Sarah asked about my vision for scaling this type of optimization to larger and more complex organizations. I answered each question with confidence, using specific examples from my experience at Meridian, but also demonstrating that I understood the broader implications for international consulting. I could see in their expressions that they were impressed not just with my technical work, but with my understanding of organizational dynamics and my ability to communicate complex ideas clearly. Near the end of the interview, Sarah asked a question that changed everything. "Madison, it's obvious you have exceptional talent for this type of work. Why are you looking to leave your current position? Is there something about your current situation that's limiting you?" It was the perfect moment to explain exactly what had happened, but I decided to be strategic about how I presented the information. I didn't want to seem like someone who complained about their boss, but I also didn't want to miss the opportunity to show the contrast between how my current work was being underutilized and how I could contribute to Pinnacle Solutions. "My current situation is complex," I began. "I've developed proposals for operational improvements that could save millions of dollars, but the organizational structure of my current company doesn't allow for the implementation of systemic changes. There's a preference for maintaining existing processes even when clear data shows that optimization is necessary and beneficial." Sarah nodded understandingly. "We understand. Many of our best consultants come from situations where their potential wasn't being fully realized. Can you give us a specific example of how this resistance to change has affected your work?" This was my opportunity. Recently, I presented a process integration project I had developed over 8 months. It included detailed analysis, functional prototypes, and financial projections showing $15 million in annual savings. My supervisor's response was to delete it completely, declaring it useless garbage in front of the entire department. The silence that followed was eloquent. Alexander frowned. Priya looked genuinely surprised. Sarah leaned back in her chair with an expression that seemed to mix disbelief with indignation. "He deleted your work?" Sarah asked, "without reviewing the analysis or considering implementation." "Correct," I replied. "It was deleted from the company servers in front of 30 colleagues as a demonstration that that type of work was outside my assigned responsibilities. That's exactly the kind of managerial myopia that our clients hire us to eliminate," Alexander said. "The fact that you can maintain your passion for optimization after that experience says a lot about your professional resilience." The interview continued for another 20 minutes, but I could feel the dynamic had changed. I was no longer just a candidate being evaluated. I was a talented professional who had been underutilized and deserved a better opportunity. When the interview ended, Sarah gave me the kind of feedback I had been hoping to hear for years. "Madison, your approach to process analysis is exactly what we need. You combine technical rigor with creative thinking and a sophisticated understanding of organizational dynamics. You would be leading some of our most important projects from day one." "What would be the next steps?" I asked. "Normally, our selection process includes another round of interviews with the regional team," Sarah explained. "But in your case, the panel is ready to make an immediate offer. If you're interested, we could have the contract documents ready by tomorrow." An immediate offer. After years of Robert telling me my ideas were too ambitious and that I didn't understand my role, one of the world's most prestigious consulting firms was ready to hire me immediately. "I'm definitely interested," I said. "When would you need me to start?" "Ideally, in 2 weeks," Sarah replied. "We understand you might need time to transition from your current position, but we have a project with a client in São Paulo that would be perfect for your experience. You could be leading process optimization for one of Brazil's largest financial companies." After hanging up, I sat in my home office for several minutes, staring at the screen with a smile I couldn't contain. In less than 48 hours, I had gone from being publicly humiliated to receiving a job offer that would multiply my salary by 15 and put me in charge of exactly the kind of projects Robert claimed I wasn't qualified to handle. But I wasn't ready to simply resign and disappear quietly. Robert had made this personal when he chose to humiliate me in front of the entire department. He had turned my professional contribution into a public spectacle of his authority. Now it was time for him to experience what it felt like when the tables turned. I spent the rest of Tuesday crafting my resignation strategy. It couldn't be just a simple 2-week notice. It had to be a demonstration that would expose exactly how wrong he had been about the value of my work, and it had to be done in a way that would be impossible for him to spin or minimize. Wednesday morning, I arrived at the office with a USB drive containing a complete backup of Project Streamline and a plan that would make Robert's public humiliation of me look like a minor inconvenience compared to what was about to happen to him. The first step was to schedule a meeting with Janet Wilson, the VP of Operations who supervised Robert's department. I had met Janet several times during company events, and she had always seemed like someone who valued data-driven decision-making over political maneuvering. If anyone would understand the magnitude of what Robert had dismissed, it would be her. I sent Janet an email requesting a 30-minute meeting to discuss operational efficiency opportunities that could significantly impact the company's financial performance. I was careful not to mention Robert or hint at any conflict. I wanted her to focus on the substance of what I had to present, not the politics of how it had been handled. Janet replied within an hour, scheduling the meeting for Thursday at 2 p.m. "I'm always interested in efficiency improvements," she wrote. "Looking forward to seeing what you've discovered." Thursday afternoon, I arrived at Janet's office with a printed copy of Project Streamline 2.0 and my laptop loaded with the functional demonstration. Janet was a woman in her early 50s with gray hair and the kind of direct gaze that suggested she didn't tolerate time-wasting or corporate nonsense. "Madison," she said, gesturing for me to sit across from her desk, "tell me about these efficiency opportunities you mentioned." For the next 25 minutes, I presented Project Streamline with the same passion and detail I had shown to Pinnacle Solutions. I walked her through the redundancy analysis, the cost calculations, the software prototype, and the implementation timeline. But most importantly, I showed her the working demonstration that processed real company data and produced results that were 67% faster and 52% more accurate than current processes. Janet's reaction was everything I had hoped for. Her eyes widened when she saw the cost savings projections. She leaned forward when I showed her the software demonstration. She took notes when I explained the implementation timeline. And when I finished, she sat back in her chair with an expression that mixed amazement with frustration. "Madison," she said, "this is extraordinary work. These savings projections, are they based on real performance data?" "Every calculation is based on actual processing times and error rates from the past 18 months, I confirmed. "The software demonstration uses real transactions from our database to show exactly what the optimized workflow would look like." "And you developed this entirely on your own initiative?" "Over 8 months of personal time, yes. I wanted to create a complete proof of concept that could demonstrate the viability of integration before proposing it to management." Janet flipped through the printed report, stopping at pages that showed the most dramatic efficiency improvements. "This level of analysis, it's the kind of work we usually hire external consultants to do. Why haven't I seen this before?" This was the moment I had been waiting for. "I presented it to Robert Martinez 2 weeks ago," I said, keeping my voice neutral and professional. "Unfortunately, he determined that it was outside the scope of my responsibilities and decided not to pursue it further." "Not pursue it?" Janet looked genuinely confused. "Did he give you specific concerns about the methodology or the implementation plan?" "He said that structural changes required external consultants and corporate approval, and that my role was to analyze existing processes, not redesign organizational structure." Janet was quiet for a moment, looking at the cost savings calculations. "Madison, this project could save us more money annually than we spend on external consulting for the entire company." "Are you telling me Robert dismissed it without requesting a formal review?" "He deleted it from the company servers," I said simply. "He said it was useless garbage that served no purpose." The silence that followed was profound. Janet looked at me with an expression that seemed to cycle through surprise, confusion, and growing anger. "He deleted your work?" "In front of the entire department, yes. He said it was speculative and divisive, and that it represented exactly the kind of work that we didn't want in the department. Janet closed the report and looked directly at me. Madison, I need you to understand something. This type of analysis is exactly what we need to remain competitive in this industry. The fact that you identified these efficiencies and developed practical solutions, this is the kind of initiative we want to encourage, not discourage. She paused, seeming to consider her next words carefully. I'm going to need to discuss this situation with senior management. Can you leave this report with me? And do you have the software demonstration available for additional review? Of course, I said, handing her the USB drive. Everything is on there, including the functional prototype and all the supporting data. One more question, Janet said. Are you planning to continue developing this type of optimization work? Because this is exactly the kind of strategic thinking we need at higher levels of the organization. This was my opening. Actually, I said, I've received an offer from Pinnacle Solutions International to lead process optimization projects for their Latin American operations. They were very interested in this particular analysis. Janet's expression changed immediately. Pinnacle Solutions? They saw this work? They contacted me based on my reputation for identifying operational inefficiencies. They're offering me a position as Director of Process Optimization, working directly with Fortune 500 companies to implement exactly this type of systemic change. Madison, Janet said, leaning forward with an intensity I hadn't expected. I need you to understand that losing someone with your analytical capabilities would be a significant loss for this company. What would it take to keep you here? The irony was perfect. Less than a week after Robert had declared my work useless, the VP of Operations was asking what it would take to prevent me from leaving. But I had already made my decision. I appreciate that, Janet, but I've already accepted the position with Pinnacle Solutions. I'll be submitting my resignation tomorrow with 2 weeks' notice. Can I ask what they're offering that we're not providing? The opportunity to implement the kind of work that was just deleted from our servers, I said, and a salary of $1.2 million annually. Janet's eyes widened. $1.2 million? Plus performance bonuses and the chance to lead organizational transformations for some of the world's largest companies. She was quiet for a long moment, looking at the report again. Madison, I'm going to be completely honest with you. This situation represents a massive failure of management on our part. Your work should have been fast-tracked to implementation, not dismissed and deleted. I'll be addressing this issue immediately with Robert and with senior management. I understand, I said. But my decision is final. I start with Pinnacle Solutions in 2 weeks. As I left Janet's office, I felt a satisfaction that went beyond simple professional vindication. In 30 minutes, I had shown exactly how wrong Robert had been about my work, and I had done it in a way that would inevitably lead to questions about his judgment and competence as a manager. Friday morning, I arrived at the office with my resignation letter and a plan for the most professionally satisfying exit of my career. But before I could submit my resignation, I received an email that made the day even more perfect. The subject line read, Urgent, Process Optimization Discussion. The sender was Janet Wilson, and the message was brief. Madison, I need to see you in my office immediately. Please bring Robert Martinez with you. Robert was in his office when I knocked on his door. Janet Wilson wants to see both of us in her office immediately, I said. He looked up from his computer with the irritated expression I had come to know so well. What about? She didn't specify. She just said it was urgent and related to process optimization. Robert sighed audibly. Fine. Let's get this over with. As we walked to Janet's office, I could see that Robert was annoyed, but not concerned. He had no idea what was about to happen. He probably assumed it was some routine discussion about departmental performance or project timelines. Janet was waiting for us with my printed report open on her desk and her laptop displaying the software demonstration. The moment we sat down, she looked directly at Robert with an expression that was professional, but unmistakably serious. Robert, she began, I need you to explain to me why you rejected this process optimization project without requesting a formal review. Robert looked at the report and his face immediately changed. The confident irritation was replaced by something that looked like panic. This is the unauthorized project I discussed with Madison last week. It violates multiple protocols about... Robert, Janet interrupted. I'm not interested in protocols right now. I'm interested in results. This analysis shows potential savings of over $15 million annually. Can you explain to me why savings of that magnitude weren't worth a formal evaluation? The project required structural changes that are outside Madison's authority level, Robert said, but his voice had lost its usual confidence. These types of proposals need to go through proper channels with input from external consultants and… External consultants? Janet clicked on the software demonstration. Madison created a functional prototype that processes real data and demonstrates measurable improvements in efficiency and accuracy. What exactly would external consultants add to this analysis? Robert looked at the screen showing the working software, and I could see him realizing that his dismissal of the project was looking increasingly indefensible. The software wasn't tested for scalability or security vulnerabilities. It's a basic prototype it's a proof of concept that works, Janet said firmly. It shows exactly what the integrated system would look like and demonstrates the projected improvements with real company data. This is exactly the kind of innovative thinking we want to encourage. She turned to look at both of us. But here's what I find most concerning about this situation. Madison tells me you didn't just reject this proposal. You deleted it from company servers and told the entire department it was useless garbage. Is that accurate? The silence was beautiful. Robert opened his mouth, but no words came out. He looked at me, then at Janet, then at the demonstration still running on her laptop. His face was getting red, and I could see sweat starting to form on his forehead. He began. The project was developed without authorization, and that's not what I asked, Janet said. Did you delete 8 months of Madison's work and call it useless garbage in front of 30 colleagues? I was trying to establish clear boundaries about project protocols, Robert said, but his voice was getting higher. Madison was working on unauthorized initiatives that could disrupt departmental operations and… Robert, Janet's voice cut through his explanations. This unauthorized initiative could save us more money than we spend on consulting for the entire company. And instead of recognizing its value, you publicly humiliated the person who created it. She closed the laptop and looked directly at him. As of this morning, Madison has accepted a position with Pinnacle Solutions International as Director of Process Optimization. They're paying her $1.2 million annually to do exactly the kind of work you declared useless. Robert's face went completely white. Pinnacle Solutions? One of the world's most prestigious consulting firms, Janet confirmed. They contacted Madison specifically because of her reputation for identifying operational inefficiencies. The same work you deleted is now going to benefit their clients instead of our company. The beautiful thing about this moment was watching Robert realize that he hadn't just made a mistake in judgment. He had made a mistake that would cost the company millions of dollars and lose them an employee who was now being recruited by the industry's most elite firms. Madison, Janet continued, I understand you've already made your decision about leaving, but I want to formally apologize on behalf of the company for how your work was handled. This represents a failure of management that I will be addressing immediately. Thank you, I said. I appreciate that. She turned back to Robert. As for you, we'll be scheduling a comprehensive review of your management practices and decision-making processes. The fact that you dismissed and deleted work of this caliber suggests some serious problems with how you evaluate employee contributions. After we left Janet's office, Robert and I walked back toward our department in complete silence. But as we approached our offices, he suddenly stopped and turned to face me. Madison, he said, with a voice that was trying to sound authoritative but came across as desperate. You can't leave over one disagreement about project protocols. These kinds of misunderstandings happen in every organization. The irony was perfect. Now that he knew I was leaving for a position that paid 15 times my current salary to do the work he had called garbage, suddenly it was just a misunderstanding and a disagreement about protocols. It's not about protocols, Robert, I said calmly. It's about working in an environment where good ideas are recognized and implemented instead of deleted and ridiculed. But you're throwing away years of experience here, he continued. You're established in this department. You know our systems. You have relationships with colleagues. Starting over somewhere new is always risky. Actually, I said, I'm not starting over. I'm advancing to where my work will be valued appropriately. Pinnacle Solutions contacted me specifically because they recognized the value of what I do. They didn't need to be convinced or educated about the importance of process optimization. Robert's face was getting red again. You're making a mistake, he said. Consulting firms promise big money, but they have unrealistic expectations and high turnover. You'll be back looking for a stable position within 2 years. Maybe, I said with a smile. But I'll be looking for that stable position after earning $2.4 million and gaining experience implementing optimization projects for Fortune 500 companies. I think I'll manage. I left him standing in the hallway and went to my office to submit my resignation letter. It was brief and professional. Dear Human Resources, please accept this letter as my formal resignation from my position as Senior Process Analyst at Global Systems Meridian. My last day of employment will be date 2 weeks from today. I have accepted a position as Director of Process Optimization with Pinnacle Solutions International, where I will be leading organizational transformation initiatives for multinational corporations. I will ensure a smooth transition of my current responsibilities over the next 2 weeks. Thank you for the opportunity to contribute to Global Systems Meridian. Sincerely, Madison Cooper. After submitting the resignation, I spent the rest of the day completing routine tasks and beginning the transition documentation for my replacement. But the most satisfying part was watching Robert's behavior change completely. The aggressive confidence was gone, replaced by something that looked almost like fear. Around 3 p.m., he appeared at my office door. Madison? Can we talk privately? Of course. He closed the door and sat across from my desk. Look, he said, I may have been too hasty in my evaluation of your project. Maybe we could revisit the implementation possibilities if you're willing to stay. Too hasty. That's how he was characterizing the public deletion of 8 months of work in front of 30 colleagues. Not wrong or inappropriate or a massive error in judgment. Just too hasty. I appreciate that, I said, but I've already accepted the position with Pinnacle Solutions. I start in 10 days. What if we could match their offer? He asked. What if we promoted you to senior analyst and increased your salary to, say, $120,000 annually? $120,000. He was offering to increase my salary by 54% and thought that would compete with an offer of $1.2 million. The math was so absurd I almost laughed. Robert, their offer is 10 times that amount. But it's not about the money. It's about working in an environment where innovation is encouraged instead of deleted. He was quiet for a moment, looking at his hands. Madison, I need you to understand that managing a department requires making difficult decisions about resource allocation and strategic priorities. Sometimes good ideas have to be postponed until the timing is better. Postponed? I said. You didn't postpone my project. You deleted it and called it garbage, in front of everyone. That was... He paused, searching for words. That was poor communication on my part. But the underlying concerns about implementation were valid. Even now, facing the reality that his decision had cost the company a valuable employee and millions in potential savings, he couldn't admit he had been completely wrong. He was still trying to frame it as a communication problem rather than a judgment problem. I understand, I said, but my decision is final. The following week was surreal. Word had spread throughout the company that I was leaving for Pinnacle Solutions. And suddenly, everyone wanted to know about my optimization work. Colleagues who had sat in silence during my public humiliation were now asking if I could review their processes and suggest improvements. Carlos Mendoza, the quality control supervisor who had expressed support for integration months earlier, stopped by my office Wednesday morning. Madison, I heard about your new position. Congratulations. That's exactly the kind of work you should be doing. Thank you, Carlos. I have to ask, he said, lowering his voice. Is it true that Pinnacle Solutions is paying you over $1 million? The offer is very generous, I confirmed. He shook his head. And Robert deleted the project that got you that offer. The irony is incredible. Thursday afternoon, Maria Santos from Data Verification came to my office with a printed email. Madison, I wanted to show you this before you leave. The email was from Janet Wilson to all department heads, with the subject line, Process Optimization Initiative, New Corporate Priority. The message announced that the company would be hiring external consultants to conduct a comprehensive review of operational efficiency across all departments, with particular focus on eliminating redundancy and integrating processes where appropriate. They're going to pay consultants to do exactly what you had already done for free, Maria said. It's like deleting a winning lottery ticket and then paying someone else to pick the same numbers. Friday was my last day. I had completed all transition documentation and handed over my active projects to colleagues. At 4 p.m., I was clearing out my office when Robert appeared in the doorway. Madison, he said, I want you to know that despite our disagreements about project protocols, I respect the work you've done here. I hope your new position works out well for you. It was the closest thing to an apology I was going to get, and it was wrapped in so much corporate doublespeak that it barely qualified as acknowledgement of what had happened. Thank you, Robert. I've learned a lot working here. As I packed the last items from my desk, he lingered in the doorway. Can I ask you something? How did Pinnacle Solutions find out about your optimization work? It was the question I had been expecting. Several colleagues mentioned my projects to contacts in other companies. Word gets around in the industry when someone develops innovative solutions to common problems. It wasn't technically a lie, though I still didn't know exactly how Pinnacle Solutions had learned about Project Streamline. But I could see Robert processing the implications. My reputation in the industry was based on work he had dismissed as worthless. Monday morning, I started my new position as Director of Process Optimization for Pinnacle Solutions International. My first project was leading a team of 12 senior consultants in a complete operational transformation for one of Brazil's largest banks. Exactly the kind of systemic change Robert had declared impossible for someone at my level. But the most satisfying part wasn't the salary or the prestigious title or the international travel. It was receiving an email from Janet Wilson 3 weeks after I started at Pinnacle Solutions. The subject line read, Operational Efficiency Consulting Results. The message was brief. Madison, I wanted to update you on the consulting project we hired to review our operational efficiency. The external firm has identified potential savings of $14.8 million annually through process integration, almost exactly what your analysis had projected. The implementation is moving forward with an 18-month timeline and a consulting fee of $2.3 million. I thought you might be interested to know that your work has proven to be remarkably accurate. Best wishes in your new position. I forwarded the email to Sarah Chen at Pinnacle Solutions with a note. Interesting validation of the methodology we discussed during my interview. My former company is now paying $2.3 million to implement the same solutions I had developed internally. Sarah's response came within an hour. This is exactly why we recruit the best talent away from companies that don't recognize their value. Your former manager's loss is our gain, and ultimately our client's gain as well. 6 months later, I was leading optimization projects for 3 Fortune 500 companies and had been promoted to regional director for South America. My annual performance bonus alone was more than Robert's entire salary. But the sweetest moment came when I received a LinkedIn message from Carlos Mendoza. The subject line read, Update from Meridian. Madison, I thought you'd be interested to know that Robert Martinez was transferred to a different department last month. The official reason was organizational restructuring, but everyone knows it was because of how he handled your situation. The new department manager has implemented a policy that all employee innovation proposals must be formally reviewed by senior management before any decision is made. They're calling it the Madison Cooper Protocol. I thought you'd appreciate the irony. The Madison Cooper Protocol. They had named a policy after me to prevent other managers from making the same mistake Robert had made. It was better than any revenge I could have planned. A year later, I was featured on the cover of International Business Review as one of the top 40 under 40 optimization leaders. The article included a case study of my work at Meridian, describing how a rejected internal proposal had become a model for industry-wide best practices. The article quoted me saying, Sometimes the most valuable lesson isn't learning how to handle success, but learning how to transform humiliation into opportunity. When someone dismisses your work, they're giving you information about their limitations, not yours. I never sent Robert a copy of the article, but I'm sure he saw it. And I'm sure he understood that the useless garbage he had deleted in front of 30 colleagues had become the foundation for a career that had taken me further than he would ever go. That's the thing about perfect revenge. It doesn't require you to destroy your enemy. It just requires you to succeed so completely that their failure becomes self-evident. Robert thought he was putting me in my place, but he was actually showing me exactly where I didn't belong, and motivating me to find where I did. The best part is that I genuinely hope he learned from the experience, because if he didn't, he'll probably make the same mistake again with someone else's brilliant idea. And that person will get their own perfect revenge by succeeding somewhere that appreciates their talent. As for me, I'm exactly where I belong, leading the kind of transformational projects that actually change how organizations work, earning compensation that reflects the value I create, and working with people who understand that innovation should be celebrated, not deleted. And every time I implement a process optimization that saves a client millions of dollars, I think about that moment when Robert pressed delete and declared my work garbage. Because that moment, as humiliating as it was, became the catalyst for everything that followed. Sometimes the best thing that can happen to you is having someone underestimate you so completely that they accidentally set you free to find where you actually belong.